Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the Post 108 Academic Timescapes. Right, now we do all sorts of different posts in this series, all sorts of different genres. We look at pretty straightforward how-to guides, how to enact a literature review, how to produce a SOC, great. We also do series on, how to do an academic interview, really important. And every 10 or so, we explore a really remarkable human being. But we have one other genre that exists in these posts, and that is we focus on a really interesting, intriguing, and perhaps emerging concept. Now, the wonderful Libby wrote to me and said she was sitting in a seminar and the phrase Adam, she thought that was the author, Adam, was talked about with the phrase academic timescapes. And she's done a bit of research and she didn't find too much. It seemed interesting. Would I talk about it? Now, Libby, it's my great pleasure to do so. And what was being discussed at that seminar was Barbara Adam and her 1998 book on academic timescapes. Now, I'm so old and so close to death that I was there the first time and I read the book at the time, and yes, it was absolutely intriguing. And it's been interesting for me doing the research since 1998 on this concept for you. Very uneven. There's some pretty poor stuff, but it's been clear that from 2023, some new, emerging, and really, really gutsy and gritty research is starting to emerge. So through Libby's request and having done the review, let's talk about academic timescapes this week, because I believe this is a concept that we should watch and we should think about in our personal, professional, but also academic lives. Okay. Now, I need to clear the decks first because there's a lot of different disciplines and ideas and tropes and textual systems that use this word timescapes. Now, timescapes has been used very, very heavily in science fiction. Benford, of course, produced a book in 1980 with the title Timescapes that was about scientists sending back messages in the past to warn of environmental catastrophe. 1980, rock and roll. And Timescapes was also a really fascinating episode in Star Trek The Next Generation in Series 6. I think it's one of the best episodes, but again, use that title. So as you can see, science fiction writers have been drawn to this word over and over again. It sort of has that sort of time disparity element to it. But not only is science fiction drawn to this word, but so is science fact, particularly the wonderful and wondrous theoretical physics. Always a wonderful discipline. Now, timescapes is used in cosmology, and it has an Aotearoa New Zealand inflection. And as you know, I always try and bring that here. I am an Australian. This accent is not put on, but I'm currently sitting cross-legged in Aotearoa New Zealand. So if I can bring a bit of New Zealand to you, that's always a blessing too. So, and some of this research has some fantastic New Zealand inflection to it. Right, so dark energy was a way to explain the expanding and accelerating universe. But timescapes was a strategy, a theoretical trope to critique this notion of dark energy. So what happened was, in 2007, David Wilshire, who's the Professor of Theoretical Physics at the University of Canterbury in the South Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand, showed in an article in the New Journal of Physics that quasi-local variations in gravitational energy have created an incorrect conclusion that the universe is in fact expanding, and yes, it's accelerating in that expansion. Now, that argument has come from the equivalence principle. That is where gravitational energy and inertia are seen to be equivalent. Now, scientists misdiagnosed this differentiation at a local level as dark energy. Right, so this misidentification was based on an assumption. And the assumption was that the universe is homogeneous. That is, there's no need to account for temporal differences. Now, Wilshire, bless him, like the best theoretical physicists, we need theoretical physicists in our university. We do. But Wilshire argued that the universe must not be assumed to be homogeneous, must not be assumed to be flat, and that he was developing new models with other colleagues around the world to reveal other explanations for the apparent acceleration of the expansion of the universe. So Wilshire confirmed, obviously, that gravity slows time and that clocks move faster in empty spaces with less or no gravity. Put another way, if you think about it in our lives, time moves slower at your toes than it does at your head because of the gravitational pull of the Earth. So the more massive the object, the greater the disparity. Now, those of you, of course, that watched the wonderful film Interstellar, great film, recommend it to you, you see that gravitational time dilation is the foundation of the entire plot. Right, so there are divergent timescapes throughout, in different locations, throughout the universe. So a clock in the galaxy of the Milky Way would run 35% slower than a clock in a large cosmic void. Next life I'm coming back, by the way, and I'm going to create a band called Large Cosmic Void. Fantastic. But the argument here is there is no dark energy and the universe's expansion is not accelerating. Okay, so what all of this means is time is not absolute. And we know this. This is the theory of general relativity, moving from Newtonian physics to Einstein and beyond. Right. Okay, so we have the foundational definitions and applications of timescapes that exist outside of the social sciences and humanities. Really important, fascinating work. But let's now get into what is the main course of today. Let's look at that concept, academic timescapes. Now, in sociology, timescapes was built as a concept by Barbara Adam, and her book Timescapes of Modernity, the Environment and Invisible Hazards. Okay, she argued that, quote, and by the way, this quote will change your life, she argued that, quote, time is the invisible other that works outside and beyond the reach of our senses. End of quote. So clock time is linked with Newtonian physics, and it is a linear perspective. So when we engage with, and all of us live by, clock time, we're embedding particular ideologies about linear causality, objectivity, and rationality. But actually, just think about it at its most basic. The time that exists in nature and the time that exists in industrial capitalism are different. So nature, for example, has the seasons, right? Industrial capitalism, you clock in and you clock out. And of course, we are living the consequences of industrial time being imposed over natural time, nature's time. The other scapes that exist in our life, and there's some wonderful researchers that look at landscapes, seascapes, and also cityscapes, those scapes mark our relationship, our sensory relationship with areas of the landscape that exist. But timescapes are different because they require a consciousness first. Because when we have a timescape, when we think about time, we have to be conscious of it first because time is invisible. Okay. Isn't this exciting? So therefore, let's put in place some definitions now. So timescapes, as it exists outside of physics, is a concept that encases compound definitions of time. It is a framework that recognises that while time can be measured, it is also socially constructed. Now, a clock may measure time. But academics, we have lots of different measurements of time, a lecture, the timeline for a grant, or the time required to write a book when you've got a publisher's deadline. All of these are different configurations of academic time. So for Barbara Adam, a timescape, here we go, has 5 characteristics. So this is, if you will, the punctuation of the concept. So what are those 5? Time, temporality, tempo, timing, and past, present, and future. Let's talk about the 5. So time is a frame of variable length that is imposed externally from the outside in to the body. Temporality is the process time that exists within a system. Let me explain. So that's like growth and decay, living a life until death, learning, of course, but reversibility is not part of temporality. So to give you the most obvious example, an adult cannot become a child. Okay, so that's process time. Cool. Tempo. This is the speed and intensity of change. It is system specific and contextually unique. Let me give you an example. So say the tempo on a stock market floor is different from the tempo of going for a beautiful walk in the countryside on a Sunday morning. These are differing speeds that also construct different social relationships. Okay, the 4th characteristic of a timescape is timing. Timing. That is the synchronization between people, projects, events, and ideas. So for individuals to interact, there needs to be a synchronization of their engagements, right? So if you want to have a conversation with somebody, you both have to be in the same place, or else it's going to be very lonely and or very weird. So in a university, for example, we have a lecture timetable. A person turns up, tutors turn up, students turn up, let's hope, and all come together with synchronicity. Similarly, for students doing a sit-down examination, they have to be there at a particular time, they get a paper, they hand the paper back. So that type of synchronization is required. Now, the final characteristic of a timescape is past, present, and future. That is the modalities of time. I love this one. The argument is we embody literally the past and the present. Our bodies, this is so amazing, our bodies carry our past with us into the present. And from this present body, we see and we imagine a future. Okay, so this is very different from clock time. Clock time only has a present, only has a now. But our bodies actually carry, their pasts, our present, to a future. Amazing. Okay, so you can see there are 5 different theories that go into the concept of a timescape. And you can see they all actually really are helpful. They help us grasp time with greater diversity, but also much more complexity. The argument in timescape theory, and remember this comes from sociology, is that time is different depending on the context. So your family time is different from your work time, which is different from your leisure time, okay? And the time that exists in politics, day is a long time in politics, an hour is a long time in politics. The timing that exists in politics is different from law. And that's why so much conflict happens between politics and law. So calendar and clock time attempts to, it fails, but attempts to standardize our complex ways of living, earning a living, but also learning. It is an attempt to create order and regulation about how all of us as humans exist and engage in and with the world. Okay, so clock time intentionally attempts to reduce our reflection and critique of what's going on in our daily patterns. Because when we focus on clock time, we have to be here, we don't think about the irregularities, the oddities, and the injustices that exist in our daily life because we're focused on the clock. Now, industrial time, noting the remarkable work of We Are Not Worthy, Edward Palmer Thompson, E.P. Thompson, created industrial time. That is the clocking in and the clocking out. So through industrialization, time gained a quantity. Time gained a value. So this is where we start to talk about opening times and closing times. So what that's moving from is a personal or public time into an entity of time that we exchange for money. Now, of course, this all comes from Karl Marx Capital One. This is the exchange value. Time has a value and time is exchanged for money. Okay, so there are plenty of different timescapes that exist outside of this exchange value, industrial time. There are plenty of different ways of organising life and change and work and learning. We can share time. We can give time. But you see, work, industrial time, industrial capitalism focuses on efficiency and profit. And that requires the regulation of a working day, but continual imperatives to do more with less time. So you can see that's our theoretical conceptualization of timescape. Isn't it amazing? It is troubling, it is challenging, but it really does help us, I think, consider academic life in a different way. So let's finish off with that conversation. You see, the lived experience of being an academic is diverse, complex, and often pretty damn chaotic. But the life and time, the life of a tenured professor is very different from a tutor contracted for one semester at a time. The timescape of a PhD supervisor advisor is very different from the timescape of a PhD student. Now, two books have taken academic timescapes as their focus. One is pretty mediocre, one is terrific. Okay, so Philip Vostal's Inquiring into Academic Timescapes, published in 2021, is sort of the mediocre one. But a much better book is Timescapes of Teaching in Higher Education, published in 2023 by Penny Burke and Catherine Manatunga. And I've put Penny and Catherine's details and lots of their research in the reference list at the end. They are two remarkable scholars, and I certainly follow both their careers. Very, very important scholars. And both these books have a project, and they argue that academics every day must reflect on their time relations. We have to have a much more considered theorization of time in our daily lives, and timescapes allow us to do that. Great project, agree. Now, at its most basic, let's just get down to the reality of this. At its most basic, the argument is the teaching clock is different from the research clock. Great. So in teaching, hours must be synchronized. There must be a timescape that aligns students and teachers and facilities and technology. You've got the story. Now, in research, timescapes are different. Metrics are invented. They're arbitrary, they're invented so that more outputs are produced in a particular period. And often that period is a calendar year. So timescapes allow us to see the inequalities and the injustices that are masked by the ticking clock. So what has happened is that academia and capitalism have merged. This has taken about a century. Academia and capitalism have now merged. So the use value of knowledge outside of the university is what we are now interested in. Use value, exchange value. You with me? So what a research metric does is it saves us all a lot of time, supposedly. So what it actually really does is it blocks thinking and it blocks interpretation with stuff like tier 1 journals. Tier 1 journal, yeah. You know, and H indices and so forth. You know, these are arbitrary measurements that have been rendered significant in that merging between academia and capitalism. Okay, so, things like the journal impact factor, right? Good luck with that. But that type of metric blocks academics thinking actively about the relationship between knowledge, interface, and audience. Or put another way, I've produced this research. Who do I want to read it, or hear about it, or talk about it? And what interface are those people using? That's proper research dissemination. It's thoughtful. But instead of building this relationship between knowledge, audience, and interface, the metric comes in to stop us having those thoughts, having that consciousness. So you see, linear time has always been an instrument of control. And it's particularly important when we're considering academic timescapes, because time and how it changes in relation to market forces is rarely questioned in our university. Remember that line we started at the beginning of this post? That time is invisible, our senses don't pick it up, we don't think about it. So this means we very rarely consider time in higher education. It's invisible, it's subsumed. So therefore, we don't think about all the alternative ways that exist for organising work and learning and leisure and life and teaching and learning and community service. So is there an alternative clock that could exist in higher education? Absolutely. And this conversation is absolutely necessary, because there is no longer any career structure in higher education. The notion of the pyramidal career, we're all moving to the top. The notion of the pyramidal career has gone. It's been gone for 15 years, and there is no pyramidal progression anymore. So with that gone, we've got a diversity of research and research choices that exist in the world. Digitisation, disintermediation, magnificent. We've never had more choices in research dissemination, but the research metric has stopped them all. Okay, so we have the tail wagging the dog in teaching and learning at the moment. All the conversations on generative AI in particular. How about we talk about learning? Learning, technology second, learning first. Not hard. The theory's been doing that for 100 years, not hard. And why is graduate employability more important than the actual learning that's happening in an undergraduate degree? Right. So Molly Dollinger, I'm following her career too. Molly Dollinger has offered the most powerful use, I think, of academic timescapes to date. She's argued that, quote, the conceptualization of time and work in the higher education context is increasingly atomized, end of quote. That is, academic time must be measurable, quantifiable, and limited. Gets all a bit stressed. Got a limited amount of time. Right. So this change has emerged only from the marketization of higher education, built on managerialism and hierarchical structures. Okay, so marketization, managerialism, and the hierarchy results in radical transformations of what is an academic timescape. Now, Dollinger, this is brilliant. Dollinger argues that this is called projectified time. Projectified time. That is, our working lives become projects to render them more efficient. So academic time becomes measurable and limited, and it's granted a numerical value. So that, of course, is why teaching and research and community service are atomized now, separated out, rather than connected. And of course, they have to be atomized because they have to result in outputs that can be measured and then, of course, benchmarked against other people and other universities. Right. So this projectification means that work is only defined by specific aims and specific outputs. Okay, so give me an example. Teaching success is evaluated through key performance metrics that are, say, enrollment numbers, retention, and student satisfaction as evaluated by the terribly scientific, not end of semester surveys, right? So that's what good teaching is. The configuration of this academic neoliberal timescape means that our definitions, our aspirations, our hopes, our dreams, the diversity of definitions of success are now redundant. That's very significant, actually. The multiple definitions of what it means to be a successful academic have now been crushed. Okay, so projectification determines success, and it reifies into a quick undergraduate degree students get in, get out, and get a job. That's what the point is now. That's the academic timescape. So all the diversity of rationales for teaching and learning and research are lost. So projectification, while seeming terribly efficient, actually increases waste, fragmentation, and inefficiencies, right? So the reason for the scale of the waste in the academic neoliberal timescape is clear, and it was researched by Matthew Bunn and Anna Bennett. Fantastic research here. And they demonstrated that the neoliberal higher education landscape is fixated on the future. And that's why there's so much attention on words like disruption, vision statement, strategic plans, yes. So you see, the reason the focus is, and this is completely rational if you're in the neoliberal ideology, the reason the focus is on those words is because the future is always easy to talk about, because the future is not real. The future is unknowable. It's intangible, right? But neoliberalism must never focus on the present. Because you see, if it focuses on the present, then the inequalities, the injustices, the waste of neoliberalism is magically revealed, okay? Because you see, if we've got actual evidence, and we have this, actual evidence about teaching and learning and research, it tells a very different story from the future that is wished for in neoliberalism. The only function of the present in neoliberalism is to provide a benchmark for a future that will never happen. Okay, so these measurement systems actually become the new work of higher education. So what do we do in universities now? We measure stuff. We have new metrics, we invent metrics, and then we measure them. That's what we do in universities. So Burroughs, for example, was very critical of the H index, which supposedly evaluates the success of the research and indeed the researcher. And Burroughs described it as, quote, reified. It has taken on a life of its own, a number that has become a rhetorical device with which the neoliberal academic has come to enact academic values. End of quote. Brilliant, brilliant. The H index aggregates citations of particular publications and not others. So again, that's arbitrary. These are the publications we're interested in. We're not interested in these publications. Okay. And it also makes no differentiation with the citations that it does measure. So as we've talked about, if you write a singly authored scholarly monograph, 70,000 words, you did it, and you get a citation, that's one citation. If you write a 4-page article with 15 other authors and get a citation, that's also one citation. Now, they're not equivalent, but via the metrics that are arbitrarily invented, they are equivalent. And the irrationality of that is not enough to critique it. Similarly, all the stuff that's emerging around graduate employability actually parks or misses or buries the reality now that employers for 30 years have been able to take a degree for granted. So people that they can hire at very, very junior levels already have a degree. And how have those students gained that degree? Well, they're coming to an employer with a skill set that the employer has not paid for. So all the stuff in the old days, 30 years ago, about on-the-job training, professional development, now not terribly crucial. The students are coming to an employer with an already existing skill set that the student themselves has paid for. So the student becomes a consumer of education. And all of this is through the marketisation of higher education, and yet employers still complain that the students are arriving with not enough skills required for their particular workforce, with them not having to pay for professional development and on-the-job training. See the irrationality of this. So academic timescapes remains a concept that is still developing. Adam and her great work in the late 1990s is still very important. It still holds up. It's very interesting work, and some really significant research has emerged in the last 2 years. Now, where I think academic timescapes is at its most beneficial today is that it reveals the irrationality of higher education better than just about anything else. So talking about widening participation and diversity while actually shrinking the pathways through a degree and the subjects that are available in our universities. Talking about academic freedom while through research metrics compressing the research that's actually measured, funded, understood and supported. Okay, so we are preparing for a future at the moment of disruptions and restructures. That's our future. Disruption, restructures. And of course, all that thinking about this frightening future is not allowing us to address the injustices in our present. So at its most valuable, academic timescapes show that there are always alternatives. There are always different ways of working beyond Microsoft calendars, beyond agendas, beyond minutes. Neoliberalism lies to us because it pretends that universities are just like any other business, and they're not. Certainly, financial care and respect for public money is crucial, but they're not a business. They're something else. They exist for the public good. And timescapes may be, I think it probably will be, the trope and the theory to remind students, to remind academics, to remind citizens of the power and the potential of knowledge far beyond the knowledge economy. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.